Hey, good evening. It's Monday, January 27th. Welcome back to Everyday Talk 24/7. It's always great to start another week with you. We're talking about conformity. Remember, Paul is warning us in Romans 12:2. He says, "Don't conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind." Paul has similar thoughts in the book of Colossians where he says, "Don't be taken captive by anything that doesn't depend upon Christ. Don't be taken captive by fine-sounding arguments." Well, we've been looking at some areas where we are subject to being conformed to the pattern of this world. First one we looked at was in the media, the news media with various forms. Last time on Saturday we looked at how we're impacted by entertainment. And tonight we're going to look at secular education. I could probably take 6 months on this one, but might just do one, might do two, but at least we'll do this one. Because secular education is the language of conformity. Secular education is the language of conformity. By that I mean education that is not rooted in the written revelation of God and the honor and praise of Jesus. If it doesn't have that, then it's by definition secular education. Education that attempts to leave God out and His Word out of the educational process. Noah Webster gave us our first American dictionary. Had this to say, this is from his 1828 dictionary: "If you don't have that, it's worth getting." But this gives a different way of thought, 200 years ago, but a different way of looking at things. This is what he says in this introduction to his dictionary. "In my view, the Christian religion is the most important and one of the first things in which all children under a free government ought to be instructed. No truth is more evident to my mind than that of the Christian religion, which must be the basis of any government intended to secure the rights and privileges of a free people." That was Noah Webster. He was one of the leading forces of education up until Horace Mann joined the picture a little bit later. God is the center of what we must learn, because everything in Him flows from Him. He's the reason that we exist and take our next breath, as we'll look at in just a moment. Let me give you an example of how we have been conformed to the world's patterns. Why do we have written language? Now, that may sound like, I'm sorry, what does this have to do with anything? Well, how did we get to the point where we have written language? Is it because of a kind of an evolutionary process where we started off with pictures on the caves and then we progressed a little bit and a little bit and a little bit, and then we started writing more detail, and the Bible just kind of flowed out of that as an evolution of man's thinking? Or is the reason we have written language is because that is the purpose of God, to provide people, you and me, with a written revelation for our stability and our comfort. In other words, to leave us a written record, a self-disclosure of Himself to us, which we call the Bible. You see, if we follow a biblical worldview, the reason that we have a Bible is because, well, let me rephrase that. The reason we have written language is because God purposed for us to have a Bible so that we could find out what His good, pleasing, and perfect will is. And the Bible's been translated languages all over the world. Let me give you a little background. There's so many passages. This is a hard one for me because I'm restricting myself just to one passage tonight. We might do a couple more tomorrow. But Paul is talking in Acts 17. He's talking to the smartest people in his world. They're in Athens, Greece, at Mars Hill, which was where all the philosophers of the day went. And as you know, Greek philosophy and tradition, so much of our worldview, our educational structure, the things we think are important, our philosophy, comes from these people on Mars Hill and the discussions that they had. So Paul's talking to these quote unquote best and the brightest. And this is what he tells them. The God who made the world and everything in it is the Lord of heaven and earth, and he does not live in temples built by human hands. And he is not served by human hands as if he needed anything. So he's talking about this God who doesn't need anything, who's not restricted to temples. Rather, he himself gives life and breath and everything else. Now, wait a minute. The reason that we have our next breath is because God gives it to us. Paul's telling the most educated people in the world this. See, can we really be considered to be educated if we don't believe this? He goes on, from one man he made all the nations, that they should inhabit the whole earth, and he marked out their appointed times and determined the exact places where they would live. God did this so that they would seek him and perhaps reach out for him and find him, though he is not far from any of us. For in him we live and move and have our being. See what he's saying here? God is in control of life. He gives us our next breath. He determines where we will live. He sets the times of our life. And he does all this so that people would seek out to him and perhaps even find him. If this is a basic core of life and we're not taught this, how can we be educated? You see, if we're not living life on the basis that there is a God that matters, that sin matters, that our behavior matters, that we're accountable to this God, if we're not taught that, how can we be educated if we don't have those core facts? This is what Paul is warning us about. He says, don't conform to the pattern of this world. Secular education that attempts to exclude God is the pattern of this world. And it keeps us from being able to know who God is and what he's about. Secular education is conformity to the pattern of this world. And it leaves us uneducated about the most important things of life. Give this some thought. I'm going to come back tomorrow. I've got a couple other passages I want to go with you and work through these issues about that. But we've got to understand, secular education is conformity to this world. It doesn't bring freedom. It brings slavery and bondage. Again, love your thoughts and feedback. Thank you for being here. And Lord willing, we'll talk to you tomorrow. You have a great night. Bye-bye.